I froze mid-step, the words hanging in the air like a storm I couldn't escape. My mother, standing in the kitchen with that casual, almost proud smile, said, "We used your college fund for your sister's IVF." I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. My college fund. Every extra chore, every summer job, every penny I had scraped together and saved because I believed in my future. Gone. For her. For my sister. My stomach turned, and my hands curled into fists before I even realized it. I wanted to scream, to demand why, to make her see the world she'd just shattered for me. But I couldn't. My voice felt trapped, strangled by disbelief. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Everything I'd worked for, every dream I had of leaving this house, of escaping this favoritism, of making something of myself, had been taken. And she stood there, smiling like I should feel grateful. I wanted to say 1,000 words, but I held back. I whispered just one word inside my head, and it echoed louder than anything I could ever say. I locked my bedroom door and sank onto the edge of my bed, my mind racing faster than my heart could keep up. The anger bubbled beneath the surface, a quiet, simmering fire that threatened to consume me if I didn't find a way to contain it. I kept replaying my mother's words, each syllable sharper than a knife. "We used your college fund for your sister's IVF." Every memory of scrimping, saving, and sacrificing came flooding back. The summers I worked 2 jobs while my sister got lavish birthday parties. The weekends I spent tutoring kids in the neighborhood instead of enjoying time with friends. The nights I counted every penny I could spare while my mother bought gifts for her favorite. It wasn't fair. I wasn't asking for much, just the chance to pursue my education, to carve out a life for myself. And yet, time and again, her favoritism had been laid bare in subtle, stinging ways. I remembered the look on her face when my sister got that expensive laptop I had begged for, and how I had clapped anyway, pretending to be happy, pretending that it didn't hurt. Now the final blow had landed, and I realized how long I had carried this resentment in silence. It wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, fairness, being seen. And for the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of betrayal, letting the anger root deep, knowing that it would shape what I did next. Every day felt like walking a tightrope in my own home. My parents' smiles were polished and practiced, the kind they showed to guests or neighbors, but behind closed doors the truth was impossible to ignore. My sister lounged in the living room, her presence commanding attention effortlessly, while I quietly tidied, cooked, or did chores that went unnoticed. They praised her for minor achievements, exaggerating them to the point where even strangers would think she was the only one trying in this family, while my own successes were met with a nod or a shrug, as if my efforts were invisible. Birthday parties were a battlefield of favoritism, gifts distributed unevenly, compliments reserved for her, and my contributions dismissed as expected. I learned to smile through it, to applaud her while my own dreams simmered in the background. Even during dinners, casual remarks cut deep. "You're so practical. She has more of a flair for life," they'd say, never realizing how much I longed for recognition. Yet, beneath the surface, I was watching, analyzing, noticing patterns, cataloguing moments of injustice. Every overlooked achievement, every whispered preference, fueled a quiet, calculated fire within me. I began thinking strategically, imagining ways to shift the balance, to claim what had been denied, to turn their assumptions about me against them. And though I said nothing aloud, I could feel the first stirrings of a plan forming, one they would never see coming. I called my best friend, the one person who always seemed to understand without judgment, and spilled everything in a rush of words I hadn't dared speak aloud. "I can't believe they did this," I said, my voice trembling. "My college fund gone, just like that, spent on her IVF?" There was a pause on the other end, the kind that made my stomach knot. "You have every right to be furious," my friend said finally. "But what will you do?" I swallowed hard, unsure. "I don't know," I admitted. If I say something, it's going to blow up. But if I don't, I feel like I'm letting them win, letting her win. My friend sighed, the empathy clear through the line. You've been patient your whole life. You've sacrificed more than anyone realizes, but this is different. I felt the weight of every unspoken thought pressing against me. Confrontation could destroy relationships, but silence felt like betrayal to myself. What if I lose them anyway? I whispered. The line was quiet. And then my friend said something that stuck. Then at least you'll know you stood up for yourself. I hung up, heart hammering, the moral dilemma spinning in my mind, and I realized I had no answers yet, only questions that demanded a choice. I started small, almost imperceptibly, but each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I applied for every scholarship I could find, not just the obvious ones, but the hidden competitive ones that no one in my family thought I had the nerve or intellect to pursue. I spent nights poring over applications, writing essays that bared my soul, every word a silent rebellion against the family who had doubted me for so long. I found part-time work, not because I needed the money desperately, but because the act of earning independently reminded me that I could survive and thrive without their approval. Every paycheck, every acceptance letter felt like a small triumph, a whisper in my own mind that I was more than the sum of their favoritism. I began to notice the subtle looks of surprise when I mentioned my plans casually at family gatherings, the faint hesitation in their voices when they asked how I was funding my future. It wasn't a confrontation yet, but the seeds of empowerment had been planted, and I could feel them growing. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need to wait for their permission to succeed. I could quietly build a life that no one could take from me, and that thought alone sent a shiver of vindictive satisfaction through me. The family gathering was supposed to be cheerful, but the tension was impossible to ignore. My sister arrived, her presence commanding attention, dressed in designer clothes I couldn't afford, flaunting stories of her latest achievements that were exaggerated to the point of absurdity. Everyone laughed at her jokes, hung on her every word, while my own contributions, bringing the dessert I'd painstakingly made, arranging the living room perfectly, were barely acknowledged. I remembered the long hours I had spent working and saving, the sacrifices I had made quietly, while she seemed to glide through life without effort, rewarded at every turn. The contrast was sharp, almost cruel, and I felt my chest tighten with frustration and anger. When she casually mentioned a trip her parents had funded, I caught a flash of smug pride in my mother's eyes. The same look that had accompanied every instance of favoritism for years. I forced a smile, nodding and laughing when expected, but inside the fire of resentment burned hotter than ever. I could sense it, everyone else oblivious, and me silently cataloguing every slight, every injustice, every overlooked effort. The tension built, and I realized that if I chose to act, the opportunity for subtle public humiliation was ripe, just waiting for the right moment to tip the scales in my favor. I couldn't hold it in any longer. That evening during dinner, the familiar stream of favoritism and dismissive comments pushed me past the edge. My voice shook at first, but I forced it steady, each word deliberate. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. All those years I worked, saved, sacrificed, and my college fund was spent on her IVF? The room went silent. My father cleared his throat, trying to intervene, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done pretending this is fair. I've been invisible my whole life while she's celebrated for everything, big or small. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to make waves. But I can't anymore." My sister's mouth dropped open, her smug grin faltering. My mother opened her mouth, but the words faltered. I could see the surprise, the thin veil of control slipping. I felt a surge of power in the honesty, the acknowledgement of my pain. It was the first time anyone in the room had truly seen it, the injustice, the favoritism, the sacrifices I had made that had gone unnoticed. And yet, As I sat back, my chest still pounding, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, and unspoken questions. What would come next? And could I truly reclaim everything they had denied me? I began moving with quiet precision, each action deliberate, each step a small calculated strike against the assumptions that had kept me invisible for years. I enrolled in advanced courses, building credentials that no one in my family thought I could manage. While they laughed at my practical choices, I networked, secured mentorships, and positioned myself for opportunities that would eventually make them sit up and take notice. Every email I sent, every project I completed, became a symbol of my independence, a subtle declaration that I was no longer the powerless child they assumed I was. At social gatherings, I started to gain recognition from friends and colleagues, conversations turning toward admiration for my achievements, invitations to events I had once been excluded from. The contrast between the past and now was staggering in my own mind. The overlooked, timid me versus the competent, confident woman everyone was starting to notice. I documented small victories, internalizing each as proof that my hard work was quietly dismantling the narrative they had built around my supposed inferiority. My sister's smugness began to crack when she realized she could no longer casually dominate conversations. My mother's proud glances toward her began to falter when attention subtly shifted toward me. Each step was a whisper of empowerment, each accomplishment a piece of unspoken revenge, building toward a moment they would never forget. And as I closed another deal, received another acknowledgement, and felt the taste of success in a life I was forging without their blessing, anticipation surged within me. I knew the major reversal was coming, and this time they wouldn't be able to ignore it. The day I received the acceptance letter felt surreal. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope, scanning the words over and over. Full scholarship, room and board covered, opportunities I had only dreamed of while my sister flaunted her privileges. For the first time, I felt a surge of triumph that wasn't just personal. It was a quiet, undeniable slap to the assumptions my family had held for years. I imagined their faces when they would eventually find out, the subtle shift in how they would regard me, the disbelief they wouldn't be able to hide. My sister had spent years being coddled, praised for every minor success, while I worked tirelessly in silence. Now the tables had turned. I walked into the living room that evening, casually mentioning my acceptance, careful to let my tone be neutral, almost offhand, as if this were no big deal. Their expressions froze, my mother's eyes widened, my father's jaw tightened, and my sister's confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. I let the moment linger, letting them realize the depth of their underestimation. It wasn't boastful, not really. It was a demonstration of truth. The scholarship wasn't just money or prestige. It was validation, recognition, and the first clear evidence that all their favoritism and disregard had no power over my destiny. I watched silently as the reality sank in, knowing this was only the beginning of the reckoning and the satisfaction of seeing them stunned, powerless, and forced to acknowledge my worth was sweeter than I could have imagined. I couldn't let it linger any longer. That evening, I asked my mother to sit down with me in the living room, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm, the weight of years of suppression behind it. She tilted her head, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "About what?" I took a deep breath, feeling every ounce of courage gather inside me. "About the college fund, about the years of favoritism, about how my efforts, my sacrifices were invisible while she," I paused, gesturing toward my sister, "was celebrated for everything, even the things she didn't earn." The room went still. My father shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, and my sister stared, caught mid-smirk. I felt the surge of validation, the knowledge that I finally had their full attention. Do you realize what you did? Do you understand the message you sent me? That my dreams were secondary, my worth measured against her convenience? My mother opened her mouth, then closed it, faltering under the weight of her own hypocrisy. I spent years bending, hiding, excusing, and believing that one day you would see me, I continued, my voice steady but filled with fire. But all those years, I was invisible to you, and now I am done being invisible. My hands trembled slightly, but I held my gaze, letting the gravity of my words sink into every corner of the room. This wasn't just anger, it was recognition, a declaration that I would no longer tolerate injustice. I could see it in their faces, surprise, shame, and for the first time, a recognition that their actions had consequences. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with realization, but it was mine. I had spoken, fully and truthfully, and the air had shifted. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, how they would react, or if they could even begin to understand the impact of their choices. But in that moment, I felt a fierce, undeniable sense of inner victory. I had claimed my voice, my validation, and even if the fallout was coming, I was ready. The announcement came on a Friday morning, and I almost didn't believe it at first. My name was at the top of the newsletter, featured as the recipient of a prestigious award for my work, a recognition that had taken years of effort, late nights, and sacrifices that my family had long ignored. As I read the words aloud to myself, a rush of satisfaction surged through me. I imagined their faces, my mother's carefully maintained composure faltering, my father's eyes widening in disbelief, my sister's confident smirk crumbling into something unrecognizable. That evening, during a family gathering, the moment arrived. I casually mentioned the recognition, letting the words settle slowly like a weight in the room. My mother's polite smile wavered, and my sister's laugh caught in her throat. The realization was unmistakable. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, and now the world was acknowledging my achievements in a way they could not ignore. I felt a thrill of vindication unlike anything I had experienced before. Every sneer, every dismissive remark from the past had been inverted. The contrast was stark. The overlooked, powerless me of years ago versus the empowered, publicly validated version of myself now. And as I looked around the room, I could see the shift. The power had changed hands. I wasn't just succeeding, I was rewriting the narrative they had constructed, and the satisfaction of watching them silently recognize the consequences of their choices was intoxicating. This wasn't revenge in the petty sense. It was justice, undeniable and public, and I could finally breathe knowing that my value had been seen, loud and clear. Sitting alone that evening, I let myself finally breathe, the weight of years of resentment and anger slowly lifting. I thought about the journey, the shock of the revelation, the silent rage, the careful steps I had taken to reclaim my agency. I realized that the victories weren't just about recognition or awards. They were about understanding my own worth, about seeing the truth of my family for what it was and choosing how I would respond. My parents and sister had flaws I couldn't change, favoritism and selfishness baked into patterns I had no power to fix, but I could control how I allowed them to affect me. There was a bittersweet ache in that realization, knowing some wounds wouldn't fully heal, but also a quiet joy in seeing myself rise above them. I had learned to value my efforts, to trust my instincts, and to act when injustice demanded it. Every small triumph, every moment of public or personal vindication had reinforced that empowerment comes from within, not from approval or acknowledgement from those who fail to see you. And in that calm after the storm, I felt a resilience I had never known before, a sense that no matter what came next, I could face it with clarity, strength, and the knowledge that I had claimed my own path. Just when I thought the storm had passed, my mother tried to assert control again, dropping hints about family obligations and subtle jabs at my choices. My sister chimed in, her voice dripping with faux concern, trying to manipulate the narrative as she had for years. But this time, I didn't flinch. I responded calmly, each word measured, exposing their hypocrisy without anger, letting them fumble under the weight of their own actions. They realized too late that I had already outmaneuvered them, that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Their attempts to regain dominance were feeble, transparent, and entirely ineffective. I watched, serene and resolute, as they stumbled over their words. The same smugness that once silenced me, now powerless. The satisfaction was quiet but deep. Karma had played out, justice had been served, and I maintained control without compromising my integrity. In that moment, the final truth was undeniable. I was no longer the child to be overlooked or dismissed. I was the one setting the terms, and they could only watch. Looking back, it's clear that everything I endured, every slight and every overlooked effort shaped the person I am today. The betrayal cut deep, but it also taught me resilience, patience, and the quiet power of strategy. I've learned that validation doesn't have to come from those who fail to see you. It can come from within, from proving to yourself what you're capable of. The journey wasn't easy, and some wounds will always linger, but the victories, both personal and public, have made the pain worth enduring. And in the end, when the dust settled, I faced them not with anger, but with calm confidence, knowing the truth was on my side. I didn't need to shout or plead for recognition. I simply existed, achieved, and reclaimed my worth. And as I reflect on it all, the moment that started everything, the moment that could have broken me, comes full circle. I said just one word,